Okay, chapter 22 time then, the deal. More in media res here. So when we get started into this chapter, we get straight into the dialogue again. It's kind of a continuation again with your man Koch. And let's go.
Flooded, leaving others stranded on the eastern side. Now, the groundwater had frozen, and a new escape was being planned. Chapter 22. The Deal. I wanted to go, Koch tells me, because I had the feeling it was all perfectly organised. I thought if the danger was too great, we'd get a signal, just as we had with the false passport scheme. The students waited at Frau Paul's apartment for word to come from a courier. As before, this attempt was being organised by Western students who would tell the Easterners where the tunnel was and when and how they could enter. The courier came with the information. The instructions were to go to a particular street near the Rosa Luxemburg Theatre, Koch says. There, a car would be parked with a small sign on its back dash. From that sign, we'd be able to decipher the address of the building where the tunnel could be entered. Then they were to go to a telephone booth nearby. If everything was in order to proceed, there would be a sticking plaster under the receiver. If the plaster wasn't there, it meant that someone had ripped it off as a warning. Then it was just a matter of proceeding to the address and uttering the code words. They were to enter the building at intervals of half an hour, and they would be shown through the tunnel. If all went well, a signal would come from the window of a building on the western side. A white flag for success. If there were problems, they would see a red ball instead. Hartmut Ruhledans and I went to check it out the afternoon beforehand. We took the underground to Rosa Luxemburg station and had a look around. They saw the car and the telephone booth, and they worked out how long it would take them to get there from the Paul's apartment that evening. I set out by myself, and Hartmut came after me at a safe interval. He was about 100 metres behind me or so. Koch went to the car and read the sign on the back dash. It was some kind of riddle to do with springs. I can't remember exactly, he says, and the number 45. Brunnen means spring or creek. Koch worked out he was to go to 45 Brunnenstrasse. Then he went to the phone booth to find the sticking plaster under the receiver. 45 Brunnenstrasse was a short way from the booth. It's also right around the corner from my place.
Okay, so this is quite a literal chapter. It's just procedural, talking us through the way in which this deal was undertaken. And you've got a complete absence, really, of metaphors and Funder's figurative language here. And that's important too, because it's important to pick out when things aren't there, why they're not there. And this is purely to deliver information. It's purely informative writing to explain to the reader exactly what happened. And you've got these interesting topic sentences at the start of each paragraph. And what she tends to do here, and you can see in this last one particularly, is that she mentions 45 Brunnenstrasse and then picks up 45 Brunnenstrasse in the next paragraph. So there's a sort of epistrophe there of, not epistrophe, anadiplosis of ending one paragraph with one thing, or near enough ending one paragraph with one thing, and then picking up with it straight away in the next to lead us on. It's all part of that narrative hook, that narrative progression, a sense that things are going somewhere. But actually this is very, very procedural. So there's not a great deal of annotation to make at this point in the chapter, because it is procedural and just giving us the very much noun phrases with adjectives, very little in the way of metaphors really, or similes. It's non-figurative. But then it has to be, because it doesn't want to be fictionalized. It wants to be real. So that's worth being aware of as well.
I wandered there one morning. The sky was pale blue and high, and the sun shone like a small light in a freezer. Brunnenstrasse hits Bernauerstrasse, which is where the wall ran, and where the famous pictures of people jumping out of their apartments onto mattresses on the western side were taken on the 13th of August 1961. Now there's just a stretch of overgrown grass here. If you didn't know that the wall had been in this place, you'd find it hard to imagine. Eventually, there will be new apartment buildings built over it in the same style as the older ones, and in less than one generation, this scar will be invisible. For the moment, though, there is something strange about this stretch. It's not a park, it's not even an empty lot, it's just a hole in the city. I hunched my collar up high as I walked. I was watching the street numbers closely, looking for number 45, when I passed a shop and read its sign. I retraced my steps. I had read it right. The sign said, digging equipment for hire or sale. Spring diggers, electrical percussion hammers, augers, hand borers, pumps. Two young men walked past. They were tough, both of them wearing their jackets open in the cold. One's T-shirt read, in English, "Too drunk to fuck," and the other's, in German, "Out of the way, an arsehole is coming." They stared hard at me, then at the shop, then back at me again, as if to figure out what I might find so fascinating about a pump and drill place. 45 Brunnenstrasse is an ordinary 5-story apartment block.
So that anaphora again, starting the paragraph with that phrase again, gives it significance, it gives it that narrative drive that this chapter really needs.
Nothing distinguishes it from any other building in the street. There are no plaques on it, no footpath inlay commemorating the tunnel, and, like so many buildings in the former East, it is being renovated. As I entered, 2 Turkish workmen were coming out carrying tools and pails of plaster dust. I nodded a greeting as if I knew what I was doing and walked straight in. The cellar door was on the right. I stood there for a moment. Then I opened the door onto darkness. The smell of dust and damp. I started down the steps when I heard a call. Excuse me, can I help you?" The foreman, also Turkish, stood at the top of the steps. I explained I was looking for a tunnel that had been accessible from the cellar of this building. "Wait here," he said. He fetched a torch on a long lead. We went down the steps. The cellar had a vaulted roof and wooden partitions for each apartment section. I don't think either of us thought we'd find a tunnel. He swung the light along the dirt-floored passage right to the end, and there, in the wall, was a manhole-sized area where the bricks were newer than all the others. We shone the torch at it and stood there, and I thought of the 29 people who left their country from here, and of Werner Koch and the others. When he got to the building, Koch says, "I went to the door of the cellar in the hall, and I said the code words. They were, 'Does Herr Lindemann live here?' It was meant to be for the people, the helpers behind the door. I was meant to wait for the reaction. I expected someone to appear with a torch, or perhaps to speak to me, and lead me out of there." Nothing happened. Nothing at all. I thought, something's not right here. Please God, just let me get out in one piece. I turned around and walked out of the building. And that's when they got me. Stasi in civilian clothes. I think there were 3 of them waiting on the street for me to come out again. I know now they had the building surrounded. There was one on the stairs inside too. They asked him what he was doing there, and he told them he was visiting Herr Lindemann. "There's no Herr Lindemann here," they said. They took him away, first to the police station, then into custody at the Stasi headquarters in Berlin, and finally to prison at Hohenschönhausen.
That triadic structure there, again, this is back to Funda, isn't it? So she's crafted and structured this in the way that she likes to do, and we've got this incrementum, first to the police station, then into custody, and finally to prison. So there's incrementum within that triadic structure.
Hartmut Ruhrdanz watched the whole thing from the other side of the street, Koch says. Then he went home, terrified. The Ruhrdanzes would stay in the East. They would wait till their baby was well enough to come home, and they hoped he would survive. Memory, like so much else, is unreliable, not only for what it hides and what it alters, but also for what it reveals. Frau Paul must have known why the 3 students had come to stay, and she probably knew that the tunnel attempt had failed. If she does not admit to having known, it is because for this knowledge she was made a criminal in the GDR, and because, saddest of all, she still feels like one.
That's an interesting choice of phrase, and the way she structures that parallelism there of she was made a criminal in the GDR, and because saddest of all, she still feels like one. It heightens the sense of, well, the word criminal is pushed by sort of a Zugma effect in a way, but it's not, well, I suppose kind of, made a criminal and still feels like a criminal. It kind of is Zugma, isn't it? But the parallelism as well is helpful there to push that word criminal and to sort of highlight the emotional impact of being made to feel like a criminal, not just being labelled as one, but actually feeling inside, internally, like a criminal. And Funda's picking up on that very human aspect of being labelled something.
Frau Paul showed me a Stasi report on the tunnel. Its outlet had been under our feet at Brunnenstrasse and not in the wall, as this document shows in its excruciating bureaucraties. Government of the German Democratic Republic, Ministry for State Security. Attestation on the existence of a tunnel from West Berlin into the capital of the German Democratic Republic. In the course of a cellar check by members of the National People's Army on the 18th of the 2nd, 1963, at 45 Brunnen Street in Berlin-Mitte, it was established that there was a hole in the floor of the cellar that gave rise to the supposition that a tunnel was to be found here. A widening of the hole and subsequent examination gave rise to the confirmation that in this building at 45 Brunnen Street was the end of a tunnel built across from West Berlin territory. The tunnel began on West Berlin territory, went under Bernauer Street in West Berlin and under several occupied houses in the capital of the German Democratic Republic to the cellar of 45 Brunnen Street. From the cellar of 45 Brunnen Street to the national border, the tunnel measured 130 metres and extended after that under Bernauer Street, which is approximately 30 metres wide. The dimensions of the passage amounted to 75 centimetres width and 70 to 80 centimetres in height. At the examination of the passage, 4 torches of Western make, 1 folding spade of American origin, 1 hand spade, 2 hatchets, 1 rock drill, as well as several screwdrivers were confiscated. Further to this, a range of light cables, several light globes and rubber mats were found at the site of the tunnel and confiscated. By means of comparisons with material already gathered to date, it was deduced that the student, name, of the Technical University in West Berlin was definitely involved in the organisation of the building of the tunnel to the cellar of 45 Brunnen Street. From that time on, Frau Paul and her husband were followed. In the morning when I went to work, there'd be someone close behind me, she says. If I went into Alexanderplatz to do some shopping, a man would come with me from my front door onto the bus and train, and then home again. They changed the personnel, but there was always someone there. They wanted us to feel it. Feel what? A simmering, non-specific anxiety. Apart from the fact that they were being followed, there was nothing they could have anticipated. Like most things, until it happens to you, you don't think it will. This continued for a fortnight. One morning on her way to the bus stop, 2 men in civilian clothes asked Frau Paul for her ID. This was quite common. You had to carry your ID at all times. Before she could reach into her bag to find it, a big black limousine pulled up to the curb. The men grabbed her above the elbows and shoved her in. I was kidnapped right off the street, she says. She didn't know where she was taken, but I knew I was at the Stasi. She now has the record of her interrogation, and it shows that she was at Magdalenstrasse, part of Normannenstrasse at Stasi HQ. She was interrogated from 8 a.m. on the morning of the 28th of February 1963 until the following day at 6 a.m. That was how long it lasted, she says, passing the document across to me. I always said it lasted 22 hours, and when I got access to my file, there it was, 22 hours. It is as if the things that happen to Frau Paul are so extreme to her way of thinking and to her sense of what life should be like, that she wants to make sure she does not on any account exaggerate. It is also as if she just can't believe it happened to her. Frau Paul remembers her interrogator clearly. He was young, portly, and snide. In the beginning I denied everything, but then I noticed that they already knew a great deal. They wanted to get information about the students who had stayed with us. At the end of her interrogation, she was taken back to her cell. I could hardly speak any more. I was finished. But they didn't leave me there long. They came and took me in a paddy wagon to another place. Then they continued the interrogation day and night. They liked to do it when one was sleep-deprived. They didn't give me any rest. It was during one of these sessions that they offered Frau Paul the deal. She was seated low on a backless stool in the corner of the room.
So there's the cataphoric reference that was made at the beginning of the chapter, the deal. Up until then, I mean, it was surprising the chapter wasn't called, what was the address, 45 Brunnen Street, Brunnenstrasse, and yet, but here we have the deal. So this becomes more significant because we've been anticipating and waiting for this to happen from the title chapter, or the chapter title rather.
When the door opened, it concealed her. I think of Frau Paul's ample body on that small stool designed for indignity. The lieutenant interrogating her was behind a large desk. "I understand your son finds himself in enemy territory," he said. "Yes, sir." "From our information, it appears he is very ill." "Yes, sir." Where was this going? Had something happened to Torsten that she didn't know about? Surely they wouldn't do anything to a tiny, sick baby. "Would you like to see your son?" What sort of a question was that? "Yes, sir." "That can be arranged." I imagine the huge hope in her then, swelling her heart as she sat on that stool. But she says, "That's when I got suspicious. Here I was, sitting in the prison, and they were offering for me to go into enemy territory. That's what the West was then. I couldn't make any sense of it at all." "How is that possible?" she asked. "It's not at all complicated," he said. "In fact, it's a simple matter. If you would like to visit your son in enemy territory, we would ask only that, while you are there, you arranged to meet up with your young friend Michael Hinze. The two of you could go for a stroll, for instance, in the grounds of Charlottenburg Castle. She was confused, and then he said, "You can leave the rest to us." "You can leave the rest to us," she cries. Then he added, "One good turn deserves another. One good turn deserves another." Her tone is a mixture of horror and triumph. I am clearly missing something here. I wonder whether in German there is a sticklebrick noun for this strange combined emotion.
Well, in English, there's certainly a term for horror and triumph. That oxymoronic phrase there of those two words being juxtaposed together for effect. And of course, we as the reader can presumably see where this is going. What horrific deal is being set up so that Michael Hinze can be, grabbed by the Stasi and she betrays him. And in a way, there's sort of a dramatic irony there. We know from the chapter title that there's a deal to be made, and we're sort of ahead of Thunder by all accounts. There's a bit of dramatic irony here as well, in the sense that the reader knows, or seems to know slightly more than Anna Thunder does.
At that moment, she explains, Karl Wilhelm Fricker shot through my head. I had heard him years before on the radio from the West tell of his kidnapping and imprisonment, and I'd never forgotten it. In a flash, I knew. They were going to use me as bait in a trap to kidnap Michael. Karl Wilhelm Fricker is well known in Germany as a broadcaster and journalist, and as a phenomenon, the case of Fricker. He has always been an agitator against the German Democratic Republic. On April Fool's Day 1955, at a meeting in West Berlin, Stasi agents drugged his cognac and then shunted him, unconscious, over the sector border. He was convicted of war and boycott instigation against the GDR and sentenced to 4 years in solitary confinement, which he served until the last day. There was nothing the West could do to get him out. When he was released into West Berlin, he immediately, and at some risk to himself, broadcast over the airwaves the story of his abduction. At the end of an afternoon spent with him, he said to me, "Frau Paul, then Ruhedanz, is a very brave woman." Frau Paul knew Michael would trust her to come to a meeting in the park, and when they came to bundle him into a vehicle, she would have to turn her back and walk away. She doesn't know whether the offer would have meant more than one visit to Torsten or staying out of prison. She knew only that if she accepted, they would have her then, her soul bought with a visit to her critically ill son. She would be theirs forever. A stool pigeon and a tame little rat.
So there we are. We've waited all chapter long for this, but we've got back to Thunder's interpretation of things here. So there's that sort of spiritual language of her soul bought with a visit. Now that's kind of drawing on that Faustian idea of selling your soul to the devil for something in return. But obviously, well, not obviously, but in the case of Faust and the Faustian legend, the promise never stands up or never delivers as much as one would hope. And that's the fear here, isn't it, as well? And she would be theirs forever, a stool pigeon and a tame little rat. Now, that's sort of that play on words about the stool pigeon, the fact that it's not only the stool that she's made to sit on that's undignified, but also the fact that she's sort of this tamed wild creature, really, and being used by the state. So zoomorphism there, comparing her to an animal or two different animals.
Me? Bait in a trap for Michael? And of course that was an absolute no. I couldn't. Her back is straight and her hands are clenched into fists on her thighs. Karl Wilhelm Fricker, she says, was my guardian angel. She starts to crumble and break. At this moment she does not look like a woman who was saved from anything. I had to decide against my son, but I couldn't let myself be used in this way. Her back slumps, and she is crying again. She holds one hand in the other, and from time to time swaps them around, as if to give herself some kind of comfort.
That jerk back to the present there, of describing her movements, we've seen it before, obviously, with nearly every character she interviews, but we get a sort of cut back to the present tense to remind us that this is happening and this is a real, authentic narrative, and it's an anecdote that's been lived through by somebody and listened to by Thunder herself.
At that time, it was the right decision, she says through tears. And even later, too, I could always say to myself, I did not make myself guilty. I can sleep at night with what I have done. She doesn't try to cover her face. There was no right answer here, no good outcome. It is true that I didn't burden myself with this on my conscience, But I did, she draws in breath in a spasm of pain, decide against my son. It is so hard to know what kind of mortgage our acts put on our future.
That's a powerful metaphor, isn't it? The idea of a mortgage, sort of a debt, a mortgage being a huge financial debt that usually takes nearly a lifetime to pay off. And it's a very fitting metaphor here for the sort of guilt and the kind of debt that well, as she says there, that our acts put on our future, how long we have to keep paying that debt or paying back for the decisions we make.
Paul had the courage to do the right thing by her conscience in a situation where most people would decide to see their baby and tell themselves later they had no choice.
Just thinking that just still on the mortgage metaphor, it comes from the French, and let me just Google this because I know. So the first part was mort, meaning death, and the idea being it's a kind of weight on your neck. It's something that kind of is a life sentence almost. But what the gauge bit at the end is, I don't know. Let's do mortgage etymology. So from Latin and French for dead pledge. So sort of, something that you've signed your life away for, really. So yeah, it has quite heavy connotations, certainly, and it's a very powerful metaphor here and well chosen by Funder.
Once made, though, her decision took a whole new fund of courage to live with. It seems to me that Frau Paul, as one does, may have overestimated her own strength, her resistance to damage, and that she is now, for her principles, a lonely, teary, guilt-racked wreck.
So she extends that metaphor to talk about a whole new fund of courage to live with. So there's that stretching of the idea of finding money, finding capital to repay this debt, this mortgage, and she's now finding this, or having to find a whole new fund of courage, which still now she's living in debt of. And then that triadic structure there, a lonely, teary, guilt-racked wreck, with that alliterative phrase as well, kind of adds to the incrementum of that phrase, ending up as wreck, which is a strong and unflattering phrase to describe, but it's realistic, I imagine.
The result of this was that I was never interrogated again. She learnt that her husband and the 3 students had also been arrested, as well as some 30 others from all over the GDR who had been planning to leave through the tunnel.
And that's it for that one. So not a great deal of notes in that chapter, only quite a short chapter. But then we're going to carry on next time with chapter 23. So I'll see you then.